Seattle was raining that night as if the sky had split open. By the time darkness fell, the drops had turned to sheets, scrubbing the pavement so the passing headlights cut across it like knives of light. I pulled over in front of an abandoned house, its rusted fence showing no sign of anyone crossing it for a long time. And there, right there, I saw a scene that still stings my heart whenever I close my eyes. In the dim beam of my headlights, something was pressed hard against the bars. At first, I thought it was just a rain-soaked trash bag clinging to cold metal, but when I opened my door and stepped closer, I saw eyes, two trembling points of light refusing to go out. A Doberman puppy, maybe 5 months old, so thin his ribs looked like blades beneath his skin. His muzzle was wedged against the iron, bleeding where the rust had cut him, as if he was trying to fuse himself to that gate so he wouldn't be left behind. I dropped to my knees, my heart hammering in my ears. Rain poured down, but there on the bars a slip of paper still clung, faded, soaked at the edges, its crooked print just barely legible. Guard until we're back. Guard until they came back. 5 months. He had been waiting there for 5 whole months. I don't know if you can picture it. A small life that should have been chasing butterflies and tugging on shoelaces, holding itself to one spot, waiting for people who would never return. Each car that passed made him lift his head, ears up, eyes shining with hope. Then, as the lights faded, his head dropped again, heavy as stone. That ritual was repeated hundreds, thousands of times over 5 months. He never left the gate. Not once. I stepped back, exhaled, and felt as though I'd just inhaled rust and blood. Cold wind whipped across my face, but the chill inside me was worse. Who could abandon him? Who could drive away and leave this dog sitting, waiting for a call that would never come? People say dogs don't count days, but I swear to you, in those eyes were mornings and evenings and the blur of headlights he'd watched for. He didn't know he'd been abandoned. He only knew his job was to guard the gate, and he did it to the end. A neighbor, an old man named Whitaker, I learned later, told me he often saw the pup sitting there, day after day. He said, every time headlights swept over the hill, he'd lift his head like he was happy, then drop it again like his neck was broken. You couldn't watch for long. Do you hear that? Just a dog, but his loyalty was so unyielding that the whole street had to look away because they couldn't bear it. Yet no one stepped in. No one stopped. People thought he was crazy, sick, or worse. They acted like he didn't exist. I sat down on the curb, rain seeping through my clothes, cold sinking into my bones. I whispered, Valor. I gave him that name right then, as if handing him back something the world had taken, a name to be called. He didn't move. Only his ears twitched as if catching a sound from some far-off place. I saw his paws, cracked, calloused, bleeding from lying so long on concrete. A normal puppy should have been running by now, tumbling through grass. But Valor sat like a statue, his body trained to endure, only his eyes refusing to dim. I swallowed hard against the lump rising in my throat, my chest tightening. In that moment I knew, if I walked away like everyone else, if I stepped past him and left him with that iron gate, his waiting would end in silence, and no one would ever call his name again. If you're listening and your heart has just clenched, please don't turn away. Stay with me. We're going to walk forward with Valor, and I promise you will never forget these eyes. The next morning, Seattle was still cloaked in gray. The rain from the night hadn't dried, and the streets shimmered like shattered glass. I drove back to the abandoned house, and, of course, Valor was still there. His body pressed tight against the gate as if afraid that if he pulled away even a little, the one he was waiting for might not recognize him. I didn't bring a rope. I didn't bring a cage. I brought a piece of bread and a bottle of water. I knew that a dog who had waited 5 months didn't need a rescue forced on him. He needed someone who would stay. I sat down right there on the curb, low to the ground, eye level with him. You know, the Seattle morning wind sneaks straight into your collar, sharp enough to make you shiver. I tore a piece of bread and laid it on the ground between us. Not too close, just enough for him to choose. Then I leaned back against the utility pole and kept silent. Valor lifted his head for a moment at the sound of bread hitting the pavement. His ears pricked, but his eyes turned right back to the hill beyond. No headlights yet, but he watched as if he had memorized the script of waiting. My throat tightened. A 5-month-old puppy, and his eyes looked older than time. He smelled the bread, I was sure. His nose twitched, his body leaned ever so slightly forward. But then, as if pulled by an invisible chain, he pressed himself back against the gate. Hunger gnawed at him, but his fear of losing hope was stronger. He was terrified that if he left the gate, they might return and not find him waiting. I whispered, "My name is Daniel. I'm not leaving you." My voice shook, like I was saying it to myself. I had seen people lose everything before, but watching Valor wrestle with fear felt crueler than any fire I had faced. Then it happened. A car sped by, tires slicing through puddles, spraying water. Valor leapt up, ears high, eyes blazing with hope. His head jerked toward the road, every muscle taut, waiting for a miracle. But the car rushed on, leaving nothing but a cold splash behind. Instantly, his little shoulders sank, his head dropped to the ground. Can you picture it? As if the whole world had just turned its back. My heart pounded heavily in my chest. On the 3rd day, when I came again, I wasn't alone. Across the street stood a little girl with brown hair, maybe 9 years old, holding a strip of red ribbon. She tiptoed forward and tied it to the bars, right at Valor's eye level. I asked softly, "What are you doing, sweetheart?" She blushed and murmured, "So he knows. There are still good people." My eyes blurred at the innocence of her words. Valor looked up at the ribbon. For just a heartbeat, his gaze broke away from the familiar hill and rested on that fluttering strip of red. I held my breath. Such a small sign, but it was the first crack in the wall of despair. I tried again, whispering his name. Valor. His ears twitched, and then his tail. In the blink of an eye, it flicked once, just once, so small that anyone else might have missed it. But I saw, and I knew it was his way of answering, "I hear you." That night when I got home, I sat on the couch staring at nothing, close to tears over a single wag of a tail. To anyone else, it would have looked like a chance. But to me, it was proof that after 5 months of being forgotten, his heart wasn't completely closed. There was still a crack where trust could slip through. The next day, I brought water. I poured a little into the cap and set it near the bars. Valor lowered his head, sniffed, but didn't dare step closer. I didn't rush him. Instead, I talked. I told him about me, about long nights at the firehouse, about the hands I had held until the very end. I spoke softly, not for him to understand, but so he could get used to a voice without threat. By the time darkness fell, he still hadn't touched the water, but he didn't press himself flat against the gate like before. He curled up in the corner, still watching the hill, but his ears angled slightly toward me. In the cold rain, I smiled. That was the first real victory. I knew the road ahead was long, but every detail, a crumb of bread shielded from the rain, a red ribbon tied by a child, a single wag of a tail, was another stitch in the slow mending of his heart. And I promised myself I would be patient with every stitch. A week passed. Every day I went back, sitting with Valor under the shadow of that rusted gate. He still refused to leave, but sometimes, when I spoke, one ear tilted toward me. Small victories, you know, can be a single tilt of the head or a sigh that sounds like someone just set down a stone. Then, one morning, I saw a new piece of paper taped to the sagging wooden door of the house. I walked closer. On the rain-stained white sheet, bold letters cut through like a knife. Demolition scheduled in 10 days. This house would be gone in 10 days. I felt a crack inside my chest. If I did nothing, when the bulldozers came, Valor would either be dragged off in an animal control snare or buried under rubble. I turned to look at him, still sitting pressed against the bars, eyes fixed on the hill. He had no idea the clock was ticking. He only knew how to wait. That afternoon, I told Mr. Whitaker. He shook his head, his eyes glistening. Every night I see him lift his head when cars pass. Then it drops again, like his neck's broken. I never believed loyalty could last this long. I said nothing. Only one thought filled my mind. 10 days. Just 10 days to earn his trust. To get him away from that gate by his own choice. The next day I came with a little chicken. I tore it into small pieces and set them down. He smelled it, his nose fluttering, his body trembling with hunger. But then, like always, he stared back at the road. His choice was always the same, to wait for the one who had left instead of stepping toward the hand held out in front of him. I swallowed hard. Do you know that feeling of helplessness? When you're right there, offering everything, and the one you're trying to save won't reach back because their loyalty is chained to the wrong place. On the 7th night, Seattle blazed with light from a big game. Fireworks burst across the sky, the crowd's cheers echoing far away. But for Valor, the sound was a nightmare. I was sitting by the curb when the first explosion split the air. Valor sprang up, his eyes gone white. He clawed frantically at the ground, trying to squeeze himself through the narrow bars. In his panic, he bit his own tongue. Blood welled at his mouth. I saw the red smear on his chin and felt my heart twist. I didn't dare grab him, afraid it would scare him more. I only opened my arms, leaving space, and whispered, "Valor, I'm here. Nobody's taking you. Whoever left you, I won't." Another firework thundered. Valor shuddered, then suddenly threw himself into my chest. I felt his thin body, his ribs pressing straight into me. He whimpered, trembling violently, but he didn't pull away. In that moment, he had chosen me, not out of trust yet, but because the fear was too great and he needed somewhere to lean. I wrapped my arms loosely around him, my hand resting gently on his back. His fur was soaked, ice cold. I could feel his heartbeat hammering, as if it might break apart. I kept murmuring, "It's okay. I'm not going anywhere. Hear me? You're okay." The fireworks kept booming overhead, but inside me, there was a strange quiet. I knew this was the turning point. He had let me be a shelter, even for just a few seconds. When the noise faded, Valor slipped back to his corner by the gate. He still pressed himself against the bars, but something had changed. His eyes flicked toward me now and then, as if to make sure I was still there. I stayed a long time, the night wind cutting cold. I knew exactly how little time was left. I couldn't force him. If I pulled, everything would shatter. But if I did nothing, the bulldozer would come and 5 months of waiting would end in dust. I looked at his cracked paws, at the blood still on his chin, and a vow rose inside me, light as breath but heavier than stone. "Valor, I'll stay here until you choose to come with me. We don't have much time, but I won't give up." The next morning, when I came back, the warning notice had faded even more, its corners peeling up from rain and wind. Only 2 days left before the house would be torn down. I stood at the gate, my hand resting on the cold iron, feeling as if I were touching the last beats of a ticking death clock. Valor was still there, still pressed against the bars, eyes locked on the distant hill. But there was one small difference. When I approached, he didn't startle like before. He still trembled, but this time his eyes flickered with hesitation, as if asking himself whether this person would return yet again. I sat down on the curb and took out a red ribbon that the little girl Mia had pressed into my hand the day before. I remembered her face, round eyes shining, as she whispered, "Tie it on him for me." So he knows he has a home. Sometimes a child's words carry more weight than 1,000 from grown-ups. I held the ribbon out in front of me, my voice shaking as if I were speaking to an old friend. "Valor, you've guarded this gate long enough. Now you deserve a family." A morning wind swept through, the ribbon snapping bright against Seattle's gray. I saw Valor's eyes shift, for the first time, not at the hill, but at something I was holding. Slowly, I lifted my hand to tie the ribbon around his neck, careful not to press, only to brush. He stayed still. It was the first moment I let out a breath, because for the first time, he didn't pull away. Then I drew a deep breath and unlatched the rusted gate. The metal screeched, heavy like the opening of a door to fate. I left it ajar. I didn't pull. I didn't signal. I just sat there, my hands resting on my knees, my eyes steady on him. And I waited. Time drained out like breath from a lung. 3 minutes. 5. 6. I could hear my heart pounding in my chest. Valor stood trembling, looking at the road, then at me, then at the gate. And then he lifted a paw. A thin, cracked front paw set itself right on my shoe. I froze. Can you imagine? One single paw placed on me, and I felt like my whole life had shifted. He stopped, shivering, then lifted the other paw and stepped through the gap. Valor had left the post he'd guarded for 5 long months. I heard something break inside me. Not shatter, but break open so light could get in. I bent down and whispered, "Good boy, Valor. You don't have to wait anymore." As he stepped fully out, I noticed something caught on his neck. I gently pulled it free. Beneath a strip of old, soaked tape was a small nylon tag. I opened it, and the letters appeared, smeared but still clear. "Guard until we're back." I stared at the tag, then at Valor trembling against my leg. My throat closed. He had done exactly that. He had guarded to the very end. He had waited, believed, sacrificed his puppyhood to keep a promise that would never be rewarded. I clenched the tag in my hand and whispered, "They're not coming back, Valor, but I did." His tail flicked, not once, but twice, like an answer. I wrapped my arms slowly around that frail body. This time, he didn't retreat. He trembled, but he didn't leave my side. I felt his damp fur, his ribs sharp beneath my palms. I held him as if holding 5 months of loneliness, blind loyalty, and nights of terror. That night, when I took Valor to my temporary home, I knew we had crossed a threshold. I was no longer the stranger at the gate. I had become his new anchor. But deep inside, I also knew the greatest wound wasn't his body. The real wound was his heart, and healing that would take more than one night. I watched him curl up in a towel, his breath short and shallow. I whispered one more time, "You've guarded long enough. Now, let me guard your sleep." When I carried Valor away from that gate, I realized just how light he was. In my arms wasn't a sturdy 5-month-old Doberman. It was a bundle of bones wrapped in damp fur. With every step, I feared that fragile breath might fade before we made it home. I drove straight to the emergency vet. The glass doors slid open, and the sharp scent of antiseptic stung my nose. The doctor, A woman with kind eyes and silver hair pulled back neatly, looked at Valor, then at me, her gaze weighted with sorrow. She placed the stethoscope against his chest, listened in silence for a long while, then shook her head gently. "He's alive, but his body is depleted. Cracked nails, calloused paws. His lungs are lucky, not yet inflamed. But the heart, his heart is so tired. It will take time for him to believe in anything again." Her words cut deep. Not only was his body broken, his trust was shattered too. After she gave him fluids and bandaged his wounds, I wrapped Valor in a thick towel. On the ride home, he lay still on the seat, his head resting against my hand. Each time the car jolted, he flinched, then pressed closer, clinging to the only rhythm that felt familiar, my heartbeat beneath a soaked shirt. At home, I had prepared a corner by the sofa, a thick wool blanket, a bowl of clean water, and some soft food. I set Valor down. He didn't curl into the blanket right away. He froze, eyes scanning the room, as if he couldn't believe a roof could exist over his head. I sat on the floor, eye level with him. I didn't push, only whispered, "This is your home now, Valor. No more gates, no more cold concrete, just blankets and warm light." Slowly, he stepped forward, placed one paw on the edge of the blanket, and then his trembling body collapsed onto it. I heard the first sigh in my house, a deep, heavy breath, like someone finally laying down a burden carried too long. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat against the sofa, watching every rise and fall of his chest. Each breath lifted as though carrying a stone. I remembered nights at the firehouse, cradling people pulled from flames, listening to their ragged gasps in the smoke. Valor's breathing was the same, fragile, but proof he was still here. Around midnight, I woke with a start, cold sweat down my back. I had dreamed of sirens, of voices screaming, of the ones I couldn't save. My chest heaved, heart pounding, and then I felt a gentle pressure against me. Valor. He had pushed himself upright, stumbled close, and pressed his nose into my chest. His wet eyes looked up in the dark. No bark, no whimper. Just trembling, steady presence, as if to pull me out of my nightmare. I laid my hand on his head, feeling the rough fur warming under my palm. My voice broke as I whispered, "Thank you, Valor. Turns out, I need you just as much as you need me." He let out a low, soft sound, then curled up at my feet. My heart slowed, my breath steadied. In the silence, there was only the rhythm of his breathing and the wind at the window. By morning, sunlight slipped across the blanket. Valor was still there, but different. His head no longer pressed to iron bars, his eyes no longer searching a distant hill. He only tilted his head toward me. And for the first time, I saw his tail tap the blanket, steady, not trembling. I knew healing would take time, but that night, in the dark, he had pulled me from my nightmare, and I had given him a home. Two lost souls had found each other, and in each other, what the world had taken away. Safety. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the Seattle curtains, golden and gentle like diluted honey. I opened my eyes at the sound of a faint rustle on the floor. Valor. He was still on the wool blanket, but his ears were up, eyes wide, no longer drowsy. There was something different in that gaze. Not just watchfulness, but a faint glimmer. A question. Could this really be safety? I whispered softly, "Good morning, Valor." He blinked, and then his tail tapped twice on the blanket. My heart tightened, not from worry but from a quiet joy, like hearing a child's first laugh. I set a bowl of clean water and a little soft food in front of him. He rose slowly, his legs trembling. For the first time, he tried stepping off the blanket. One paw buckled, his thin body almost collapsing. I held out my hand, not to catch him, only to let him know it was there. Valor tried again. One step, then another. My small room felt suddenly endless. Each step he took was a milestone. I watched through misted eyes as he reached the bowl, bent his head, and drank in slow sips as if afraid that if he drank too fast, it might disappear. I murmured, "No, Valor. The water won't vanish. The house won't vanish. I won't vanish." He lifted his head, droplets clinging to his whiskers. I extended my hand, not touching, just near. This time he came forward, his nose brushing the tips of my fingers. A brief touch, but warmth spread through me like a flame catching at my heart. All that day I left the window open. The air carried in the scent of damp wood, the smell of my brewing coffee, and the rustle of leaves. Valor lay at my feet, sometimes lifting his head to look around. He didn't play yet, didn't run, but he began to watch the world beyond concrete and bars. And most of all, every time I moved, his eyes didn't drift to the hill anymore. They followed me. In the afternoon, little Mia knocked at the door. She held a small bag of cookies. When she saw Valor, her face lit up. "Look, he's wearing the ribbon now. He really has a home." Valor looked at her, ears perked, tail flicking. I saw her eyes glisten, and my own lips trembled. In that moment, I realized it wasn't only me and Valor who were healing. A child, too, was learning that loyalty and kindness matter. That night, I lay on the sofa, Valor curled on the floor. I listened to his breathing, this time deeper, steadier. No soft whimpers of fear, only the sound of peace. I thought of the rusted gate, the paper guard until we're back. And I knew that with each step Valor took today, that paper's power over his heart was fading. Around midnight, an old dream startled me awake. Sirens, roaring flames. My chest clenched. Then I felt Valor's head resting on my arm. He didn't bark or growl. He simply lay there, warm and patient, as if saying, "I'll stand guard for you now, the way you did for me." Tears slid down my cheeks, silent. I scratched his ear lightly and whispered, "You don't have to guard the gate anymore. You have a home now, and so do I." The next morning, the sun rose. I stood by the window and called his name. "Valor." He lifted his head, eyes bright, and for the first time, his tail wagged longer than a single beat. He stood, unsteady but determined, and walked toward me. With each step, I could hear my own heart ringing, and I understood Valor was no longer waiting for someone else. He had begun to learn how to walk into love on the same cracked paws that once stood watch on cold concrete. Time moved faster than I ever imagined. From the day Valor stepped through that gate, his life, and mine, had turned down a different path. Every morning as the Seattle sunlight slipped through the window, I called his name, Valor. And every time, his ears perked, his tail beat like a tiny drum of joy. From the trembling, emaciated pup he once was, life had returned to his eyes. His black coat grew glossy again, and the cracks on his paws healed. But the greatest change wasn't in his body, it was in his trust. One afternoon, I let him out into the backyard. Valor ran small circles, still awkward but determined. I stood watching, my vision blurring. The dog, who had sat motionless for 5 months, guarding a silent gate, was now running on grass as if learning to rewrite a stolen childhood. Mr. Whitaker called over from his fence, his voice rough. "Can't believe it. That gatekeeper pup, he knows how to smile with his tail now." I laughed, but my throat tightened. I answered, "You're right. He's not guarding a gate anymore. He's guarding my heart. That evening, as I sat on the sofa and Valor curled at my feet, it hit me. He was the one saving me. On nights when nightmares dragged me into darkness, all he had to do was lie his warm head on my chest, and the panic would ease. He didn't speak, didn't judge. He simply stayed. You know, maybe the greatest love in this world isn't in grand gestures, but in steady presence. Not leaving, not turning away. Just being there when someone needs you. Valor taught me that, through the same loyalty that nearly cost him his life. On the 1-month anniversary of his living with me, little Mia came to visit. She brought a small collar with Valor engraved on it. When I slipped it on, Valor wagged his tail, lifted his head like a soldier wearing armor. Mia clapped her hands. Now everyone will know he has a name, a home, a family. I turned away, hiding a tear. In that moment I knew, every loss, every rainy night, every hour of waiting at the rusty gate had not been meaningless. It had led to this moment, a dog being called by his true name, and an old heart like mine learning to believe again. Valor didn't just walk out of an old gate. He pulled me out of an invisible one, the gate of memory, of loss, of the people I couldn't save. That night, before turning off the light, I knelt beside him, placed my hand on his back, and whispered, "You don't have to guard anyone's house anymore. Now you have a home, and so do I. Thank you, Valor." He looked up at me, brown eyes glowing, and his tail thumped 3 solid beats on the floor. A sure, joyful rhythm, like a drum closing an old chapter. I cried, not from sadness, but from happiness breaking open inside me. And here's what I want to tell you, the person listening to this story. If you feel a tear slipping down your cheek, please remember, out there are still other Valors, sitting in front of some gate, waiting for someone who will never come. Maybe you'll be the one to stop, kneel down and whisper, "I see you." I won't walk away. If this story has touched your heart, please share it. One click from you could be the reason another life is saved. And please subscribe so we can create more homes, safer places, where no dog has to wait in vain. Valor is sleeping at my feet now, his breathing even like a lullaby. I believe, for the first time in 5 months, he knows what peace feels like. And in my own heart, for the first time in years, I know what hope feels like. I want to pause here, with you, in this quiet moment. Valor lies beside me, his breath steady, no longer trembling like the day I found him at the rusty gate. I still remember those desperate eyes, those cracked paws pressed to cold iron, the way his head dropped each time a car passed without stopping. And then I look at him now, a dog asleep, tail twitching in a dream. I tell this story not only about Valor, I tell it because I believe you've had a moment like this too. A small life, abandoned and fragile, still waiting for someone to stop. Maybe it was a shivering cat under an eave, a bird with a broken wing, or a lost dog at the corner of your street. I want to ask you, have you ever saved a living soul? And how is it now? Is it still with you? Or did it leave a space in your heart, a space full of meaning? If you're smiling through tears, remembering, please leave your story. I want to hear it, so we know compassion has never disappeared. Thank you for sitting with me and Valor until the end of this journey. If you want to help me write the next ones, please subscribe. Not for me, but for the lives out there, waiting for a door to open, a hand to reach out. Because all it takes is one person stopping, and an entire world can change for a living soul.